indigeneity, as I perceive it, is the nature of people who have been in a country a lot longer than anybody else. People who have established their what they call in New Zealand TURANGAWAEWAE, the place that they stand. I'm a Canadian who came to New Zealand once in 1952 for a year and came back in 1961, on and off since then. But as a Canadian coming to a strange country, especially as a child, as I was in 1952, there were many things that were so very different. The Maori world, which I knew very little of back then because I was just involved in it as a kid, it had no meaning. My friends were Maori. We were only here a year that time. My best friend was a little fella called Bully. Put a rock through a window, pointed at me when the owners came out. So he did it. Didn't establish a great relationship at the time, but he was my best friend. But over the years, having come back and being here, what also has become apparent to me is that the values of many of the Maori that have got their old traditional values, I've realized are extremely important. And they're important not just for me, but for the world, because they reflect so many things that we of the West, Europeans, or what Maori call Pākehā, we've lost them. I'll touch briefly on only two at the moment. WHANAUNGATANGA, which is family extended to community, and MANAAKITANGA, helping people out because you are family, and laying emphasis on family and people. Yeah, but my interest, while that's very intellectual, my interest and my accompaniment to that interest is I've got interested in some of the artifacts of Maori, many of which I couldn't afford to buy when I looked at them and saw that how wonderfully beautiful they were. So I decided to make them. I make what Maori call TAONGA PUORO, which is musical treasures. I make Maori weapons, PATU, TAIAHA, tefa, etc. Right. As I said, I make these things because I thought they were wonderful and beautiful, but I couldn't afford them at the price they were, so I started making them myself. And as a European on the outside looking in, I was fortunate enough to have a Maori friend tell me that what I was doing he thought was pretty good. So I've continued to do it. Europeans earlier in the last century who first came here with total ignorance of the Maori world, they would look at some of these weapons, most particularly the PATU, which I'll talk about first because it's the one that's pertinent to me in many ways. The shape of it is like a teardrop, ROIMATA. The medium used, it could be stone, bone, or wood, RAKAU, and it was described in those early days as a bludgeon by some and a club by others, and yet it's neither of those things. It was close quarter fighting and was used pretty well in the hands of someone who was proficient. It was used to thrust under the ribs, and so I mentioned this, and also the reti at the end of it was used to damage the temple and kill outright. So it's neither a club nor a bludgeon. It was a weapon like one might consider a knife a weapon. You'd thrust with it. And the PATU would be thrust under the ribs or be thrust under the chin.
So it's more of an intimate, it was an intimate weapon, as opposed to like the word bludgeon or club sort of has connotations of just not of a skilled instrument or.
Yeah, well that's my view.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that the mindset of Europeans coming here were already of a less than cordial idea of what's going on for Maori. They were all savages, etc. So what they did had to be primitive, like using a bludgeon or a club, when in fact they weren't. And they were as adept at using them as the British were at using the sword. So I started on making these things, and a friend of mine said that they were pretty good. I kept doing it. But in more recent times, I've got involved in making musical instruments, not only Maori TAONGA PUORO, but American style flutes, etc. And it's in making them that I've kind of found an extra passion in my life, I suppose. And it was because of them and your ability with electronica that we first talked about recording and seeing what we could come up with in terms of my lack of ability, but my love of these instruments. There is a story that I've told before, and I'll tell it again, because my love of things Maori artifact, my love of the culture, the best parts of that culture that are still alive, speak to me of a world that still might be if people could take a look closely and decide, yeah, that's a hell of a lot better than what we've got at the moment. And by that I mean the wars, the fighting, the complete self-interest that's permeating every aspect of life in the European quarters.
So the idea that indigenous culture has something to offer in the modern world, increasingly perhaps.
Well, for me, it is. It speaks volumes, and alongside that, because of the age I'm getting to, I suppose, it's the simpler things in life, the little pleasures like the musical instruments that I know very little about in terms of music, but enjoy the making of, that gives me a great deal more satisfaction than pursuing a consumerist notion of society. Yeah, I just think that we all need to kind of look more closely at what we're about and take lessons not just from Maori, but from other indigenous cultures around the world whose simplicity of living and whose appreciation of the world around them is what we need to evolve, because we are distancing ourselves from appreciating the world around us.
So is it correct to say that through your interest in things like PATU, TAONGA PUORO, it sort of like puts you in touch with that, you know, the holistic indigenous culture? It's a way in, so to speak. Like it gives a tangible, you know, a route to get involved, and then you can broaden out the knowledge through the medium, so to speak.
No, they're not necessarily connected in my mind.
Right.
One is I have a great deal of appreciation for, as I say, the best aspects of Maori culture. Maori tikanga. Tika meaning right, what's right. Tikanga is living by what's right. And then there's the musical aspect, which is more an accident of being around Maori and realizing that the music that I was hearing from the instruments that I was making, played by others, more often than not, was kind of wonderful. I think that it's just part of the same world, but sort of came across them in different ways. That's what we Europeans do. We slot thing here and a thing there. Instruments, politics,
culture.
For WHAKAARO, thoughts. And yet it's all very much one. My understanding is the Maori never had a word for art. Art was just what was part and parcel of their living. It was as equally important as kai or food or whatever. So,
and I imagine, and I could be wrong, I imagine in a non-written culture, in oral culture, then art is expression. So it's not considered separate from life, as you say, or like just it's interconnected as part and parcel of, perhaps.
well, definitely. Over the years that I've been here and what I've heard and read, and even recently on a documentary on TV, they interviewed a man who was recovering trunks from caloric sounds, and he was Maori and he was carver, and he said this is how we record our stories, carving on wood, and it's a major aspect for anybody who's been to New Zealand. It's a major aspect of what Maori do. And of course, we call it art, they call it our story.
Yeah.
So there's a big difference there, but to come back to the point, which is that Pākehā like the slaughter thing here and slaughter thing there and slaughter thing there. And I think we've become very confused because we have all these separate entities when in fact it's just one stream.
Yeah.
One stream. But I also feel about flutes, the American Native Indian style flute, very easy to play well enough to make it sound as though you know what you're doing when you don't. That there's something magic about it. Magic about when I hear Maori who play the KOAUAU, which is a very short flute, if you like. When I hear them play it and they know what they're about, it opens up a whole new world of feeling, of
it's emotive.
Yeah, comprehension too, because it's plaintive. It sometimes, very often, speaks to me, because it's all subjective, of things lost.
Right.
But when they're right there again with their instruments and building up a head of steam in terms of bringing them back into the world, it's kind of cool because it parallels the notion that I have that if we can bring this music back, then maybe we can bring
other things back.
The other things that I talked about, which are Maori.
It's like a portal to the ancient world.
Yeah.
That we can open and explore.
And it speaks not just of music, but of the values that music addresses in some instances or expresses in others. So, yeah, all of that. And, I just think we need to be more mindful of the world around us and the things we make from using the materials in simple fashion from the world around us bring us closer in that relationship. One of the things I really like about the Maori world is that they will often name these weapons, particularly PATU, I should say mere. Yeah, there's PATU and there's mere. My understanding from the very early days was that they were all mere until they'd been used, and once they'd been used, they were called PATU. And I believe that might well have been the case in the early days, but in more recent times, we've made this separation that PATU is a lesser quality than mere. Mere generally these days refers to a PATU made of POUNAMU.
Okay.
And then it becomes mere. At least that's what it appears to be. And those mere POUNAMU PATU in numerous instances have been given names because they became famous, either because of who wielded them or who was dispatched by them. And they've become heirlooms within families, some of them. Just to give an indication, though, because my interest in these weapons isn't the martial aspect. My interest is in their inherent beauty. And there was Te Kuti Rikirangi. He had two, amongst others, but two that I know of. One was called Gabriel, and one was called Makairi. And Makairi was for war, Gabriel was for peace. In other words, they weren't always used just as weapons. I know of many instances where they were used to heal. The gift of a mere from one chief to another was not necessarily a sign of submission, but a sign of coming together. What's his name? The Te Rauparaha. He swapped. He swapped a waka TAOA, which is a 90-foot war canoe, for a PATU.
Right.
And I mean, it gives you some idea.
Show the value.
Yeah, of the value, right? That he put to it.
On it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, there are all of these amazing stories out there, which I've touched at some part of my life upon briefly. I've never become an expert in any of this stuff, but it's been wonderful to be able to make some of it and to be able to hold some others work to have this interest. But like I say, it's the music that was or an idea of making something that would be classified music that brought us together. The thought that I've had in the past when you and I first caught up was that some of these instruments have just been waiting for the electronic age to happen, because they seem so wonderful when they're enhanced by some of the technological
advancements. Techniques.
Yeah. Whether it be reverb or echo or but yeah, they just seem like they've been waiting for it because they sound so good. And yeah, to play with them. I have an interest in things Maori artifacts, Maori culture. I spend a bit of my time making Maori weapons, what are called PATU or mere, TAIAHA, tefa, the instruments whereby Maori warred and fought each other. PATU can be made out of wood, stone, or bone. I'll get a piece of wood in this basic shape. I will cut it at an angle down the side, and then I will shape the PATU and work it. It ends up looking like this. Stone is a lot different. This is pakoi or argillite, and while greenstone is the hallmark of Maori weapons, I like argillite. It polishes up quite nicely and it's rather wonderful. This one and this one are complete. This is called MUKA. MUKA comes from HARAKEKE. You might recognize this as FLAX. Maori call it HARAKEKE. And MUKA is the fibers that you can pull apart on this. And that, when it's beaten, becomes this, MUKA. And I use them for the handles of the weapons. They have particular meaning for me because the PATU, while it's a weapon of war, has been known to be a purveyor of peace. But another more interesting aspect for me is that ROIMATA, the tears, ngā ROIMATA, tears, is the basic shape of a PATU. And whenever I make that connection, I think of all the pain and all the shit that must have been handed down because of this weapon. It is not a club, it is not a bludgeon, it is a weapon, close quarter fighting, but it was also used for healing. My interest in making these came about because I saw these wonderful, beautiful objects, which in themselves are wonderful, quite apart from their function, and I could never afford them. So I decided to make them for myself, give it a go, and these are the result. There are others. I do have a mere POUNAMU, which I haven't shown, but you get the idea of what they are. The time it takes to make them, people will ask how long, and I never know the answer to that, because when I'm making them, I pick them up and put them aside and carry on and do something else. I'll come back to them, I'll put them aside again, I'll come back to them. Basically I work on them when I feel like it, and that's the way it goes. Some are obviously lavish with more attention than others. This wood is KAURI, and it's very simple in its grain, but Maori would never have used that in the past. This is southern RATA, and it might well have been used. I don't think it was, but it might well have been used because it's hard enough. The woods that I would favour to make what's called RAKAU wood, PATU, the woods I favour would be Manuka, Kanaka, Aki, Puriri, and those are New Zealand natives. PATU KOHATU is stone, can be made from argillite, green wacky, grey wacky, basalt, but as I said earlier, the most important one is POUNAMU.